The UK hasn't got as much money as it would like, and there are lots of reasons for this. The war in Ukraine, COVID, the US war with Iran being three. Those are events outside the UK's control, but there's something else, which we chose to do, that most economists think is holding our economy back. One estimate is of a long-term hit of 4%. Another says it's already been 6 to 8%, a difference of up to £240 billion a year to the size of the economy. I'm talking about this.
We're out.
It's 10 years since the UK chose Brexit. It was one of the most consequential moments for the country since the Second World War. If you're under 28, you're too young to have voted, but you're living with the consequences of that decision. 52% voted to leave the European Union, despite the leaders of the main parties being against it, despite advice from the US, despite repeated warnings about the economy. I reported on the campaign and the vote and everything that's followed. 10 years on, I want to return to the question of Brexit and the economy, because many analysts say those warnings were right. And this matters because when an economy is smaller than it would have been, it can mean fewer jobs, lower wages, and less tax for the government to collect. That's particularly important because the UK's finances are already under pressure. Spending on health and social care, defence, welfare and more is all projected to go up. An economy being held back doesn't help with that. Now, to be clear, for some, Brexit was primarily about sovereignty, about the UK controlling its affairs, from its trade and regulations to its borders and immigration. And because of Brexit, the UK does have more control. Some Brexiteers argue that's worth having even with a cost. But understanding Brexit's economic impact still matters. It's a story with a lot of detail, and we're going to go through it step by step, because it's the detail that reveals why the UK chose a particular type of Brexit and reveals the difference that decision has made. To do this, first we need to go back to 2016. It was an extraordinary time. Politicians and the media were under intense scrutiny. There was a torrent of claims. Warnings Brexit would cause a housing crash, which it didn't. The famous bus with its misleading claim. And 2 days before the referendum, there was a debate at Wembley Arena. Yes, the same Wembley Arena that hosts gigs. The Who and Little Mix played earlier that year. Now it was politics' turn. We had never seen anything like it. And Boris Johnson was one of those on stage. And while speaking, he made a reference to the UK entrepreneur, Sir James Dyson.
He thinks staying in would be an act of economic self-harm.
All right.
And the way to more wealth and more jobs is to leave the EU, vote
Boris.
More wealth, more jobs with Brexit, economic self-harm without it. Let's keep that in mind. 2 days later, Thursday, June the 23rd, it was decision time. And in the middle of the night, we got the result. The next morning, I was up early to interview Tony Blair. Just before I did, I listened to this on the radio.
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
I headed first to Downing Street, then down the road to just by the Houses of Parliament. On the Monday, I was in Brussels at an EU summit. Everyone was trying to work out what all of this meant, because here's the twist. The UK had chosen Brexit, but it wasn't clear what exactly the UK wanted Brexit to be, which, as I heard, was causing some frustration at the EU.
If they don't know what to do now, that's the proof that they didn't reflect on the consequences of their campaign.
Soon after, David Cameron confirmed when he'd leave office and headed back inside number 10. Humming as he went. Days later, Theresa May became Prime Minister. Somewhat confusingly, she'd been against Brexit before the referendum, but was now in charge of delivering it. In the coming months, I was back in Brussels, reporting on what progress was being made, with mixed results. Mr. Juncker, Ros Atkins, BBC News. I wanted to know how the previous evening with Theresa May had gone. In 2017, Theresa May delivered a plot twist and called an election to strengthen her position in Parliament. Bid for clear Brexit mandates, said The Sun. Crush the saboteurs was the Daily Mail's front page, taking aim at game-playing Ramonas. But for the Prime Minister, the election did not go to plan. The Conservatives were still the biggest party, but they lost their majority, which made things very complicated for Brexit and for Theresa May. The morning after, I was in Downing Street and we were all asking, what would she say now?
We will fulfil the promise of Brexit together.
But that's not what's followed. Instead, there were months of political turmoil. At one stage, MPs voted on a range of Brexit options. One evening, their answers were no, 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 and no. Theresa May had lost control of the process, and while there are many dimensions to this, one key issue was that some Brexiteers felt her plans compromise UK sovereignty, and they blocked them. Low on options, the Prime Minister asked the EU for more time, which it agreed to. Remember, this whole story, all of the twists and turns, connect to the type of Brexit that the UK would choose and the impact that had on the UK economy. And in 2019, I was back in Brussels, and the story changed again. And it's another piece of evidence that Brexit is reshaping UK politics in ways I'm not sure any of us imagined. In the European elections, the Brexit Party had come first. It's since become Reform UK. The Conservatives, the ruling party, were fifth. And for Theresa May, that was that.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold.
Once more, the Conservatives needed a new leader, and the clock was ticking. In the summer, I was back in Brussels again, wondering what the EU was making of all of this. You also said the UK shouldn't waste its 6 months. Do you think it's wasting the 6 months that you gave it on Brexit?
When it comes to Brexit as such, yes, I am afraid that we wasted time.
Soon, though, the UK shifted gears. Its new Prime Minister was Boris Johnson, and he wasted no time in calling another election to get Brexit done. A lot of people like that idea. He won a landslide.
We did it! We pulled it off, didn't we?
Now, I'm not just telling you all of this to relive the drama, though it is some story. I'm telling you all of this because there's a connection between how this saga played out and the UK economy now, and this is why. From the EU's perspective, its single market, a huge free trade zone, is one of the main benefits of membership. It was out of the question that it would allow a country that had left to have easy access to it. To do so would undermine the whole idea of the EU. And then for some Brexiteers, staying tied to EU rules, especially connected to the single market and the free movement of people, well, that would undermine the whole idea of Brexit. There was an ideological divide, and that divide would shape negotiations as the UK and the EU try to thrash out what their relationship would be after Brexit. With the deadline set for the end of the year, negotiations continued until, on Christmas Eve 2020, a deal was done. As expected, the UK was out of the single market and the customs union, a so-called hard Brexit. Boris Johnson declared, "We have taken back control of our laws and our destiny."
I think this deal means a new stability and a new certainty.
It did deliver some certainty. And Mr. Johnson also said this.
It will not be a bad thing, in my view, for the EU to have a prosperous and dynamic and contented UK on your doorstep.
This isn't necessarily what's been on the EU's doorstep since. The UK hasn't looked contented under the three prime ministers who followed Boris Johnson, nor is it as prosperous as it would like, and that's for various reasons, but one is that unbending commitment to taking back control led to a deal that appears to have come at a cost.
But what being outside the single market means is a whole load of what we call non-tariff barriers, that is to say checks and assessments and paperwork that people exporting to the European Union from the United Kingdom have to go through, which makes trade slower, it makes trade more expensive, it makes trade more difficult.
It's here that we move from the political drama to the consequences of the UK's decisions, and at this point I'm going to get some help from my BBC Verify colleague Ben Chu. He's been following this story for years. Hi Ben.
Hello Ros.
Now, where do we start with this? How do we assess the impact of Brexit on the UK's economy?
Well, Ros, there are a number of ways to think about this question, but a good place to start is trade.
Ben suggests we look at trade, which connects to prices, jobs and wages. Here's some data based on analysis by BBC Verify. It looks at UK trade overall, combining what we import with what we export. This chart compares the situation in 2026 with 2019, which was the last full year the UK spent in the single market and customs union, and was before the pandemic. As you can see, over that time, UK trade has become weaker compared with Italy, France, Germany, and Canada. It's stronger than the US, though trade's a smaller share of the US economy because it sells so many goods to Americans. So that's how much we're trading. Then there's who the UK is trading with. Because back in 2016, Boris Johnson argued the EU was holding back UK trade.
The vast opportunity cost of not being able to do free trade deals with the most lucrative and fastest growing markets in the world, because we are in the EU.
Well, let's look at that. In 2016, trade with the EU was 48% of the UK's total trade. In 2024, it was 46%, so just a slight reduction. There have been more than 70 new trade deals around the world, but most are direct copies of deals done by the EU. There are others, in particular with Australia, India and New Zealand, but the impact is not what some may have hoped for. To assess that, we can look at GDP, gross domestic product. Essentially, it's the value of everything a country produces in a year, and official estimates say that all of those new deals are worth 0.6% to GDP. So not close to outweighing the estimated negative impacts of Brexit. So that's trade. What next?
Well, another really important metric is investment. So this could be investment by UK firms, or it could be investment by other multinational companies in the UK economy. Has Brexit had a positive or a negative impact on the internal investment in the UK?
Think of investment as a vote of confidence in the future. It tells us if businesses think the UK is a good place to spend money, to expand, to hire people. Here's what's happened since 2016. Investment flatlined after the referendum, and while it's picked up since 2021, it remains below the trajectory it was on before the Brexit vote. And lower investment's not good news. It can mean fewer job opportunities, weaker pay growth, lower productivity. But you might be thinking, well, okay, but how much has all of this got to do with Brexit? And that's a reasonable question. Because of COVID, because of Ukraine, because of the war with Iran. And these are just recent events. If we go back to 2008, there's the global financial crisis. The UK is still feeling the effects of that. Or on investment, for decades, the UK has been lower than Germany and France. All of this is relevant to the economy. All of this predates Brexit. And it definitely makes it hard to assess Brexit's impact. But a particular approach can help. In the dictionary, the definition of doppelganger is someone who looks like someone else. A doppelganger study, well, it uses comparisons with similar countries to estimate what would have happened without a major intervention like Brexit. Once more, our metric is going to be GDP. In other words, the size of the economy. And this is one widely referenced doppelganger study. It estimates the UK's economy's progress if Brexit hadn't happened, and then shows what has happened. You can see the difference. It's around 5% in terms of the economy's size. By this measure, Brexit is taking a toll. Now, I'm aware that's been an awful lot for us to take in, but if we just stop for a moment and pull all of this together, this is where we get to.
I think you can have a degree of confidence to say that it has held back the UK economy relative to where it otherwise would have been by this stage. What you can't be very confident about, in my view, is exactly how big that negative impact has been.
There's one more thing I wanted to show you. I referenced it near the beginning. It's another study conducted by economists from Stanford University in the US, the Bank of England, and the German Central Bank. They estimate Brexit had caused a 6 to 8% reduction in GDP by last year. That's worth between 180 and 240 billion pounds a year to the size of the economy. That's even more than the government's budget forecast of the OBR has said. It looked across numerous studies and estimated a negative impact of around 4% over 15 years. More recently, the OBR has said Brexit has made the economy less productive and taken a chunk out of future economic output. Given all of this, what about the politicians who made the case for Brexit? In 2019, Boris Johnson called it a massive economic opportunity. After agreeing the deal, he repeatedly defended it. Nigel Farage is now leader of Reform UK. In 2023, he said this.
Is we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically, what we could have done.
Or there's Lord Frost, who led the UK's negotiations in 2019. He wrote recently that Britain's economic problems date from well before Brexit, and with reference to Germany and France, said that Britain's growth pattern has not changed compared to our major European comparators. However, as we've seen, most economists argue when broader analysis and comparisons are done, Brexit's impact is clear. But there are some economists who argue that the negative impact of Brexit has been overstated?
I think there were some upfront costs, but over time those costs will diminish. If the only thing that Brexit did was increase trade barriers to the European Union, then clearly it wouldn't be a success. But it provides lots of opportunities to regulate the economy in better ways.
For example, some suggest that the UK can make more of AI than the EU can because the UK can choose its own regulations. Watching all of this is the current Labour government. Last year it stated the Brexit deal has caused long-term damage to the economy. Note it blames the deal, not Brexit itself. It's also talking of closer ties with the EU, from measures to ease food exports to making it easier for young people to study in Europe. But so long as the UK is out of the single market and customs union, expectations should be managed.
The assumption is that although it may help around the edges, it won't have a transformative effect, having closer ties with the EU short of joining those institutions.
That's not on the cards at the moment. The economist Gerard Lyons has talked of Brexit having an impact like a Nike swoosh, a dip, then an uptick. Lord Frost, the UK's negotiator of the Brexit deal, argues we have had a very flat swoosh. But the data suggests Brexit isn't helping a swoosh of any type, not yet at least. Boris Johnson said of Brexit, "Our policy is having our cake and eating it." He would go on to call his deal with the EU a cakeist treaty. But there's plenty of evidence that, on the economy, the UK hasn't been able to have its cake and eat it. To say so isn't about the overall merits of Brexit, nor about rehashing old arguments. It's about understanding Brexit's impact on this country's present and future. Because right now, based on available evidence, Brexit appears to be doing our economy more harm than good.